So pretty much it's in every system of my body except my heart and central nervous system. So my lung capacity was reduced to 65%. And not relying on really the medical system to help me. As unfortunate as that is to say, right? They can't. They can't help.
Adam, how did you find Carnivore?
Well, Dave, like many people, unfortunately, my health started to deteriorate. I got diagnosed with an idiopathic systemic disease. And as I was going through the medical system, I realized that there is a big gap in the knowledge that they do have to be able to treat people effectively versus what is known about idiopathic systemic disease, right? And the disease I got diagnosed with, which was 4 years ago, is called sarcoidosis. And on top of sarcoidosis, I also have type 1 diabetes. So I have had type 1 diabetes for 28 years. And never in the course of the 28 years that I did have type 1 diabetes did any type of, MD or nutritionalist that I did say, did they even advocate for any type of low carb ketogenic diet? The way I did find Carnivore is when I was going through the hospital system, as I've been in and out of the hospital over 50 times in the last 4 years with this diagnosis of the sarcoidosis for treatment, imaging, tests, and appointments, is I was actually in a bookstore and I picked up Dr. Whitaker's book, which was called Intermittent Fasting. And I started to get really involved in reading about intermittent fasting. And then I picked up Dr. Gundry's ketogenic diet. So his Plant Paradox book. And actually there was a sentence in his Plant Paradox books that talks about a carnivore elimination diet. And I am looking at the disease that I do have, which is sarcoidosis, which is an idiopathic it's an idiopathic inflammatory diet. And I'm like, well, if there's a diet that can, eliminate all of the inflammation I am feeling systemically, this could be a really good shot at being able to take control of my health. And at the same time, a therapeutic ketogenic diet, which is what the carnivore diet is really important from what I found for type 1 diabetics. And this was something, as again, I was never told about for 28 years. So being a type 1 diabetic, my body does not have the ability to process glucose and utilize it through entering into the cell, right? So my pancreas does not make insulin. So my body has a very hard time to be able to regulate glucose. And that's when, type 1 diabetics like myself, we take exogenous insulin. And I was on a standard American diet up until about 10, 11 months ago. And that included 5 meals a day and about 300 grams of carbohydrates. And that was recommended by all the MDs, endocrinologists, and the nutritionists that I saw as well. And it was really about balancing how much insulin you take with the amount of carbohydrates that are going in your body. And the reality is when you're eating 5 meals a day and 300 grams of carbohydrates, it's just a gamble. You know what? Your blood sugar goes really high, which is hyperglycemia. And then you take all this insulin and then it goes low and then you get hypoglycemic. And it's really just a constant battle of, finding the numbers and really just chasing blood sugar numbers. So pre-carnivore, my hemoglobin A1C for 28 years was between 7.0 and 7.4. So that gives us an average number of when it's converted to between 10 to 11 millimoles per liter. So if you look at the average person, their normal blood sugar is between 4 and 6. So my average blood sugar was between almost two times what a normal person's blood sugar was. And all the MDs that I saw, which were all very nice, very caring people, they all accepted my hemoglobin A1C as what is normal, and that's okay. And then when we start looking into the research about cardiovascular disease, heart attack, strokes that type 1 diabetics and even type 2 diabetics experience, there is a very good relationship between how high hemoglobin A1C is and that risk. It just seems to, have an exponential effect the higher your A1C is before. My saving grace, looking back on the last 28 years I was a type 1 diabetic, was that I exercised like a maniac consistently all the time. I've always been involved in fitness and sports and lifting weights. So even though my A1C was so high, that was more than likely the saving grace that prevented any type of like peripheral neuropathies. Like I have no troubles with my eyes or my feet or anything along those lines, which a normal type 1 or even type 2 diabetic would experience at that time. So going from where I was before, being a type 1 diabetic, I'm eating 5 meals a day, my A1C is high, I'm systemically inflamed just from, diabetes alone, to a carnivore diet, I think was the hardest thing I've ever done as a type 1 diabetic. And I'm sure there's other type 1 diabetics out there as well that can attest to this. But that transition period, going from 300 grams of carbohydrates a day down to 0 grams of carbohydrate a day, is just a complete roller coaster. And there's no manual, no physician, no nurse, no nutritionist. No one's going to be able to really provide and give you the insight to be able to do this. It's going to have to be you. You're going to have to be really, really accountable for what you're eating, what's going in your mouth, which is, what I decided to do to be able to fix my health. And I took about two months, 6 to 8 weeks, to be able to really fully transition from a standard American diet to a carnivore, which is, all meat-based diet. And the first few things I did that I thought were very, very helpful was I took away all the snacks, all the eating at night, and just went down to about 2 meals a day. And just by like a mathematical point of averages, to be able to balance what I'm eating with my insulin, 2 meals versus 5 meals, it's just mathematically easier to do. So as I'm going through this transition, which is extremely difficult, and only eating 2 meals a day, and I'm still, working and doing all the other things that life throws at you, and being able to physically exercise, it is very, 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 difficult. I went through periods of extreme low glycemia, extreme high glycemia. I'm waking up in the middle of the night, and having low blood sugars. The CGM is going off like every hour as it's trying to keep up with the amount of change that's going through my body. Before I was carnivore, I was about 290 pounds at my heaviest. I had a really high A1C. I was insulin resistant. My waist circumference was 49 inches. My HDL was in a tank. I definitely had metabolic syndrome, without a doubt. And at that time, before going to carnivore, my insulin requirements based off of what I was eating, the standard American diet, 3 meals a day, 5 snacks a day, I was taking 100 units of long-acting Tresiba and 120 units of fast-acting Tresiba. Fast-acting Humalog to cover, my meals and what I was eating. So to give context, the normal pancreas produces about 50 units of insulin. So, what that standard American diet I was eating, which was, completely and totally my fault, that's how much insulin I was taking to try and, chase my numbers and bring my blood sugar down, which was just, as I've been getting older, especially the last 4 or 5 years, and managing the diabetes, it's been taking a toll more and more on myself. And for sure, there are other people out there that can relate to how difficult it is and how draining it can be on the human body. Before I transitioned to becoming a carnivore, I actually went vegan for 10 months. And, the plant-based diet is out there, and, people are having struggles with their health like I was. And I'm like, all right, well, you know what, let's give it a go. And it didn't change anything, unfortunately. My hemoglobin A1C stayed the exact same. My insulin requirements, which were still astronomical, were still the same. Even though I'm eating all plants and everything, I'm still, making, air fried potatoes and sweet potatoes and, all the good things that are all, carbohydrates, and that, our body really craves from those feedback systems that are derived from our gastrointestinal system that tell us, this is good food, we should be eating this. And right. So it was really disappointing. So after I went vegan, I went right back to the standard American diet. And as I was going carnivore, as I said a little bit earlier, my transition was very challenging, and it's got to be up to you, the individual, to really make this decision and go through with it. But on the other end of it, it was just completely and totally, spectacular, and I feel so much better as I am right now. And I tracked everything. So I tracked all my food, all my calories, all my measurements, all the insulin required, because I looked at it in terms of the more data that I have, the better I'm going to be able to make the adjustments I need for my insulin dosage based on my meals, and to be able to really get my blood sugar down to what are considered normal levels, which is between 4 to 6 millimoles per liter. That's what we go for. Up here in Canada, there's definitely a conversion to the US. I'm not sure what you guys use there in Australia. So as I'm transitioning down, one of the most effective tools I really found was a continuous glucose monitor. So that's one of those little patches you put on your body, and then it just keeps relaying the information back and forth to your phone to be able to give you a consistent blood sugar measurement. I wouldn't advise doing this or making this type of transition without a real-time glucose measurement. And they do have a degree of inaccuracy, but the ability to see what is going on in terms of a trend line is really, really vital, to be able to readjust and bolus your insulin with the amount of food that you're taking in too, right? And even during this transition, like whenever I'm getting hypoglycemic, I have like little dextrose tabs, or I'm eating like raw local honey. I'm pretty lucky to be in a little bit of a rural kind of urban area where I can have access to pasture-raised and grass-fed beef and pasture-raised chicken eggs and duck eggs and local raw honey. And I got friends that, they're pulling maple syrup out of the trees every year. This, stuff that is completely organic and free from all the pesticides and the manufacturing process too. So after I made that transition, which was about 10, 11 months ago, I've been a carnivore now for, as I said, 11 months. So I went from about 275 pounds, because when I went vegan, I lost about 15 pounds. So I was between 290, 295. And now I have lost down to 68 pounds in 10 months. My HDL has doubled. I lost 12 inches off my waist circumference. But what's really astounding is the reversal of the insulin resistance. So as I mentioned earlier, I was so insulin resistant, I was taking 100 units of long-acting insulin and 120 units of fast-acting insulin, which is broken up across the course of the day and through the meals that I eat. And now I'm taking 70% less long-acting, which is 30 units. And I am taking 10 units of fast-acting insulin over the course of the day. So we're looking at a 70% and around 90% reduction in the amount of insulin my body requires on a daily basis. And I'm still eating 3,000 calories a day. And I work out like a fiend still.
So I can't imagine what this must have been like, because for someone that's transitioning as a type 1 diabetic, there is no one there to hold your hand.
No.
As you say, you're just like testing everything and hoping for the best, right?
Yeah, that's it. I was just, it was a massive trial by fire. That's the best way I could put it. And like I said before, I was getting low. I'd get low 3 or 4 times sometime in a day. I'd be waking up in the night with hypoglycemia, and then because I put in so much insulin in my body, it makes it really difficult when you get hypoglycemic to know how much glucose you have to put back into your body to kind of level out without spiking and rebounding. And that was just extremely, extremely difficult to figure out. I was really lucky towards the end of the transition. As I said, I stumbled on Carnivore through really reading all the books first, and then realizing there's this big community, and you're doing podcasts, and Dr. Chafing, Dr. Barry, and Carrie, and all these other great people who are putting this message out there. I came across Dr. Bernstein's Diabetic Solution book, and that was also very instrumental and helpful, and it still is to this day, for the last 10 months to really make those fine-tuning adjustments. But to go from a standard American diet down to like a carnivore diet, there's no manual. It's just trial by fire, and it's something, if you really want to do it, you have to do it. And I'm pretty lucky and feel fortunate that I did do it, and I have done it successfully. And if there's any other type 1 diabetics out there that are, trying to figure this out, there's a way to do it, right? And it's not going to be easy, but it's going to be so much better for you in the long run, right? Especially now, right? My hemoglobin A1C pre-carnivore was 7.4, and now it's 5.6. And I get a massive amount of blood work done every 2 months, like a full metabolic panel, full liver function, C-reactive protein, erythrocyte sedimentation ratio, everything that looks at everything. And I look at it in terms of, this data is important, and what can I derive from it? So that's why I get so much blood work done all the time. I get it done more than what is kind of recommended, which is every 3 months, but I get it done every 2 months. And there are massive noticeable changes between, standard American diet and, unfortunately, what really is the standard diabetic diet as well. That's really the unfortunate message that is being put forward from, the diabetic agencies and governing bodies, right? It's a shame.
Yeah. So what has your doctor said? Is your doctor surprised at all by some of these results?
Oh, they're just like completely floored. They, when I've lost now, like I said, like 68 pounds, I dropped 50 pounds in the first like 5 months, and they see like all my blood markers are like totally perfect, and my hemoglobin A1C has dropped drastically, and it's never been this low in the last 28 years. They're all totally shocked, and they do ask, what are you doing? And I say, I'm on a therapeutic ketogenic diet. And as I said, I've been in and out of the hospital a lot the last, 4 years, which we'll touch on shortly. And that term seems to be very widely accepted by most of the physicians. When you say carnivore diet, they just kind of like roll your eyes at you. But if I say therapeutic ketogenic diet, right, which is what the carnivore diet is, they're like, oh, okay, then that's acceptable, right? Whatever their interpretation of it might be, right?
Yeah. When you say that, they're probably imagining some kind of derivation of a Mediterranean diet somehow or something like that. So they're like, oh, yeah, that sounds good. Yeah, of course that works. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, exactly right.
You mentioned I may pronounce this wrong. You mentioned the sarcoidosis. Is that how you pronounce it?
Yes. Yeah.
How has that been?
So that was the real reason I started the carnivore diet. So early in 2020, I got diagnosed with this disease. I had like a flare up, which is from your eyes, and like my vision was totally blurred. And it was called anterior uveitis. And I was like taken to the ER and everything. And over the course of, I'd say like 4 years, they finally pinned down what it was. So what sarcoidosis is it is this idiopathic systemic autoimmune disease, which is a fancy way of saying we don't know what causes it. It just happens. And what happens with the sarcoid is systemic inflammation, and constant systemic inflammation leads to these development of granulomas. So these nodules form in various sizes all throughout every system of the body. And they can form all throughout every system of the body. And so when I got diagnosed with this, I have it in my sinuses, on my skin, so dermatological. So I had bumps and everything all over different places in my skin. I have it in my eyes, which is called anterior uveitis, and I have it bilaterally. So it's in my eye, in both of my eyes, right? Then I have what is called hilar lymph node adenopathy. So there are these two lymph nodes that are situated behind the lungs, and these swelled up to such a degree that it restricts my lungs from actually moving. So that is a clinically diagnosed restrictive pulmonary disease. Then it's inside my lungs, it's coating. So these granulomas are forming in the bottom of the lungs. So that is a clinical diagnosis of an obstructive pulmonary disease. It is all over my liver, kidneys, gallbladder, and gastrointestinal system. And it played a role in an Achilles tendon tear as well. So pretty much it's in every system of my body except my heart and central nervous system. So my lung capacity was reduced to 65%. I've had like 6 CTs, 7 or 8 pulmonary function tests. As I said, I've been in and out of the hospital over about 50 times in the last 4 years, specifically related to this disease, right? Because it's affecting my body in so many different ways. And I looked at the carnivore diet as, well, if the diet eliminates inflammation, maybe it could do something with this disease I did have. And it wasn't in my heart. And I know that because I've actually had a cardiac MRI. But I couldn't walk up a set of stairs without gasping for air. And I was having shortness of breath and chest pains. I was pretty fucked up in a bad way. That's pretty much the best diagnosis I can, or best description of how this disease, affected my body, and especially of how aggressive it did come on. I do think the reality of it is, unfortunately, is like I did it to myself. I ate and stuffed all that food down my throat for all those years, there might have been an underlying genetic potential or disposition to it. But the reality is it was me, right? And we know that now, unfortunately, with seed oils, and how toxic the food has become, and how all of these foods really rely and play a big part in the systemic inflammation that we as people, as human beings experience on a consistent basis. So there are really two big markers that clinicians use when looking at, at systemic inflammation, and that is C-reactive protein and erythrocyte sedimentation ratio. I might screw up the pronunciation of that, but it's an ESR ratio. And just to give us some context, like as I was getting lots and lots of blood work done over the last 4 years, and especially over the last 10 months, pre-carnivore, my C-reactive protein level would be up in the high 20s, and my ESR would be upwards in terms of like 40. So normally anything over a C-reactive protein of a value of 5 is considered like systemically inflamed and a really bad marker of inflammation. And in ESR, I think it's in the mid-teens or low 20s. So as I really was going through the medical system, and dealing with the flare-ups and this disease and how it was affecting me, I see how, unfortunately, that the medical system can't really, or doesn't have the knowledge to be able to really look at and treat systemic autoimmune diseases that are idiopathic, like sarcoidosis was to me. I try and really be in what is an informed patient, and there's a standard of care that all medical practitioners in Canada have to follow. So it's a pretty much a treatment guidelines for specific diseases. So when I look at the standard of care for what is the treatment of sarcoidosis, it is giving oral prednisone, which is an immunosuppressant, and a steroid. And there are major contraindications of giving that to a type 1 diabetic when it comes to blood sugar control and liver function. So all the MDs that I would be seeing and specialists that I would be talking to would be prescribing me immunosuppressants and these corticosteroids. And I would always ask them, I'm a type 1 diabetic. You can look at the research. It's very, very clear and very, very apparent that there are complications with this. And they kind of just shrugged it off, right? As in terms of, well, if you want to take this medication, this is all we have, right? So there are what are called biologics, right? So that is like the next step higher than the initial prednisone and immunosuppressants and steroids that they prescribe to you. But the standard of care determines that a physician has to prescribe this medication for X amount of length. Then they have to increase the dosage for X amount of length longer. And then they can reevaluate and decide to take you either off it or give you the next step. So even though I was a type 1 diabetic and the medication had horrific drug interactions with the disease that I do have, they still have to prescribe it. They couldn't jump to the next step, right? With the immunosuppressants. And looking back now, I'm very, very glad I didn't take any of those medications. I dealt with the pain and suffering that I was dealing with, and that I didn't go on any of the biologics. So over the last 10, 11 months, I've been getting blood work done every 2 months. So being on a carnivore diet and being as strict as humanly possible, because I'm a type 1 diabetic, when I get hypoglycemia, I have to put some sugar in my body, but I'm very, very cautious of how much, and I know the amount to put in that levels me out, that doesn't, spike my blood sugar. So my C-reactive protein is now down from, the mid-20s of where it was before, down to 1.6. So it's unbelievable. And then my ESR ratio, which was, at 40 before, is now down to 2. So I've had pulmonary function tests recently in the last CT scan, and I'm seeing remission with all of the GI tract. So my liver, kidneys, and the gallbladder, all the nodules are pretty much almost gone off that. My GI system, which is like the colon, small bowel, large bowel, intestines, all that, it has almost cleared up. My skin is completely and totally clear of any evidence. I still get a little bit of runny nose from my sinuses, and my eyes haven't flared up at all. And I was actually having flare-ups of uveitis, which is like a form of systemic inflammation, like every 3 months. Every 3 months, I'd be back in the hospital every week looking for them to, look at me, examine, try and take biopsies of my eye, which I wouldn't let them. Yeah, that was interesting. But the real, I think, most impressive thing is that the nodules in my lungs have almost completely and totally disappeared. And my hilar lymph nodes, which were, enlarged to such a point that left me with 65% lung capacity, have shrunk. And I now have like 82% lung capacity. And no, thanks. And this shouldn't happen. You should not be able to reverse obstructive and restrictive pulmonary diseases in 10 months and regain this amount of lung capacity, right? So the carnivore diet has definitely been a game changer as well, and it's a tool, right? But I'm the one who's doing all the work day in and day out, and I am becoming more. I have gotten more and more physically active all the time. I continually push myself with running and resistance training and stuff that I've been involved with already for 20 years, right? That you can't let up. You have to keep moving forward and pushing yourself, right? And I'm just fighting for every percent of lung capacity that I've regained.
That's amazing. And so again, I've got I've got to ask, what are the doctors saying about this? Is this like they're just going, "Oh, look at that idiopathic remission," or like what's?
So if you look at some of the bodies of evidence with sarcoidosis, is that there is this special kind that comes on and then disappears, right? But there are stages of sarcoid, and I was way past the initial stage with how aggressive it was in my body, right? But the radiologists don't lie. Like the radiologists get a picture of my lungs and my GI tract from the CT scans. They look at it and they do all the measurements, and then they give it off to the doctors. And when I see that my hilar lymph nodes were enlarged to 15 millimeters, and now they're down to 8 millimeters, like the numbers just don't lie, right? And when the GI tract is all completely cleared up now, and yeah, they have no idea really what to make of it, to be honest.
It really gives you this feeling of empowerment, right? Where you can just go, the doctors are not helping. I'm just taking this into my own hands, right?
That's it. And I think that taking things into your own hands and being really accountable is something that's just synonymous with life, right? It doesn't matter if it's a diet or work or family. If you want it, you got to go do it, right? And put in the work and put in the effort to do it. Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
Definitely life-changing. And I know that there are other people out there that have the same disease that I do. And this is definitely an option for them to be able to better their quality of life, even if they don't experience the same, remission effects that I have. This is definitely going to be the best shot that you're ever going to take at experiencing something that's going to change your quality of life so dramatically. But it is not an easy road. There is no doubt about that. When I had 65% lung capacity and I was 275 pounds 10 months ago, it wasn't fun. Right. To where I am now.
Yeah. So how are you eating day to day? I think you said you were too mad.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And so what are those meals made up of? And also how do you have to balance, like how is it typically balanced with the insulin that you're taking now based on the meal times?
So I eat 2 meals a day. I'm pretty lucky, as I mentioned before. I'm in kind of like a rural urban area around, Kingston, Ontario, Canada. And I have a local guy I go to. He has pasture-raised chickens, pasture-raised duck eggs, and I go through those on a daily basis, every day. And then I can get grass-fed beef and grass-finished beef, and that's mostly what my meals consist of. But when the grocery store has a really good sale, when meat goes, 50% off, like I will go get, grain fed and grain finished beef, like no problem. But I always usually focus on ruminant meats, lamb and red beef. I don't really eat chicken. I will try and fat fortify some of my meals with bacon, right? But I can get that is local and organic from my local butchers, and they have lots of places around here to get some good bacon. And then the odd time I will include bison as well. That there is 2 farms in the local area, and they raise bison, right? So it's I feel pretty fortunate to live where I do in terms of being able to access the quality of food that I can, right? But as I said, I'll go to the grocery store and buy that too. And I usually eat 200 to 220 grams of protein per day, and then about 190, 200 grams of fat per day. So I'm putting in the calories for sure. And how I balance all that with my insulin is really, I believe, individual to me. So what the carnivore diet actually revealed to me, because it's an elimination diet and it's going to strip everything down, there's something called diabetic gastroparesis, right? So that is a peripheral neuropathy where continuously high blood sugar destroys the vagus nerve, which controls the sphincter that opens and closes the stomach. So when I was eating 5 meals a day before and continually fighting for and chasing my blood sugar numbers, it really masks the effect of what is going on in the digestive tract. So when I went carnivore, I realized through the CGMs that I actually had this disease too, right? So my stomach actually doesn't empty for like 5 or 6 hours after I eat. So I eat, and then I usually have to wait a certain amount of time, which is 5 or 6 hours, to be able to actually take and inject my insulin. And there's a few symptoms that I experienced that really made this relevant in terms of when you were getting hypoglycemic right after meals, right? Because the average stomach usually starts emptying about an hour and a half. And all the information in Dr. Bernstein's book, because it is mentioned consistently throughout his book. And yeah, so the way I eat and the way I bolus my insulin is not nearly going to be what the normal person or even normal diabetic or someone who just got it does, right? So I have to make these adjustments, unfortunately, for what the carnivore diet has revealed that I do have, which is the diabetic gastroparesis that I didn't even know I had too.
You want to kind of relating it to business, just from an operations perspective, in your daily life. I mean, this must be so much better now than it was 11 months ago. It just must be to go down 70% and 90% of the insulin you're taking. It just, everything must be easier, no?
Oh, it has made it a lot easier. Absolutely. Right. But not just the insulin. Like, I was a diabetic for 28 years, but the sarcoid is pretty much all going away. And the fact I can breathe again, and like every weekend I'm out doing, pushing my physical limits, at hiking. I'm 3 hours from the Adirondacks in New York State, and I'm doing 10, 15-mile hikes, and I'm out there with 82% lung capacity, but I'm not going to stop, right? And the feeling I have from that, and just getting stronger and building muscle and strength, and all the resistance training I'm doing. I do have a degree in kinesiology, so I'm just accelerating that at such a rate. But yeah, my quality of life is just night and day from where I was before to where I am now, and not relying on really the medical system to help me. As unfortunate as that is to say, right? They can't. They can't help. They haven't acknowledged some of the fantastic benefits from therapeutic ketogenic diets, like the carnivore diet here, right? But hopefully there's another individual out there who may have my disease that might hear your podcast and be like, there is a way out.
Yeah. And have family or friends noticed a change in you?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. My family members are just like completely, totally stunned, right? That I'm 70 pounds, almost 70 pounds lighter. And I'm just out there, and I'm doing all these different things, and pushing my physical limits. And they saw me through all the suffering, going in and out of the hospital 50 times, and over the last 4 years, and trying to understand and figure out what's going on with idiopathic disease. And yeah, no, they're totally happy. Absolutely.
If you were advising someone, or you're giving someone some tips who is also a type 1 diabetic, or is suffering from the sarcoidosis, what would you advise them to get started with carnivore?
So for a type 1 diabetic, the first thing to do would be able to pull out all the snacking and only go down to how many meals a day you feel comfortable with. Whether that's 2 or 3, that's all you really need. You need to start, like I said, looking at it from a mathematical perspective, because it's easier to control 3 meals and the reaction from the digestive tract that's going to break down all the food material, versus 4 or 5. So that would definitely be the first thing. And then definitely try and transition down a little bit in terms of carbohydrates. But you're going to have to track everything. You're going to have to look at carbohydrates, fat, protein. I know a lot of people have bad anxiety with calorie counting and weighing meals, and sometimes the mental health and mental toll that can take on some people. And I was never a fan of it myself, but I just look at it as data. And the more data you have, the more you can go back and look at adjustments. Like, I have a food journal. I don't even use an app. I use a piece of paper and a book I bought from the dollar store. But I can tell you exactly what I ate since, at the end of September, early October last year, every day, and the exact amount of insulin I took, and what happened in terms of low blood sugar, high blood sugar. So you just have to look at it in terms of data. And fight through that mental barrier for sure. In terms of for the sarcoidosis, if anybody has it, you just gotta get rid of everything, right? What I did experience with the sarcoidosis, which Sally Norton talks about in her book Toxic Superfoods, is I experienced horrible oxalate dumping, right? I had a flare up in my eyes, which is anterior uveitis, so that's a form of oxalate dumping. Because when I went back and did like a nutritional assessment on myself, right? Because I have all my food journals, and I know even what I was eating before in terms of the standard American diet, that I was on like a 2,000 to 3,000 milligrams, or 2,000 to 3,000 milligram oxalate diet a day. So I was intaking like spinach and turmeric and all the spices. The worst things you could pretty much ingest in your body is what I was doing. And transitioning down in terms of oxalate to ease the stress on your immune system for someone with sarcoid is going to be really, really helpful, right? But you're going to have to get down to nothing, right? That's the best way to do it, right? Is to just no oxalates and don't need to worry about any of the ill effects that they bring on. And then systemically, your inflammation will come down. And I saw that, right? That my inflammation systemically and my C-reactive protein and ESR number was still really, really high for the first 2 to 4 months. And then it just like fell off a cliff, right? And you can see it on all the trend lines. But those are two really important things in terms of someone else with either of those issues that are thinking about doing the carnivore diet that they could start with. But there is light at the end of the tunnel, absolutely.
Nice. So having been through this for so long, and what you've experienced over the last 11 months, when critics of carnivore say it's too restrictive, what would you say to that?
What's your health worth? That's it. Right. My health and well-being is worth this. That's all. Right. That's how I feel. Right. And if your health and physical well-being is important to you, and if this diet could be the best shot of you maintaining or even improving your quality of life, it is what it is. I forget who said it, but carbohydrates are entertainment. I eat and it's for a purpose, right? I'm not going out and eating, sushi and all these restaurants that, everybody else is doing. And, this is what I have to do for myself. And I'm absolutely and totally okay with that because I have seen the physical change, right? If I didn't see a physical change, I wouldn't have reached out to you. I wouldn't be sitting here having this conversation with you.
Yeah, nice. So, Adam, is there a way people can reach out to you? Do you have any social media?
Yeah, I've got an Instagram handle as well. It's called Type 1 Health and Fitness. And I have absolutely zero social media presence, but I'm trying to change that very, very slowly. But yeah, if there's somebody out there that experiences the same thing that I have, or want some advice or tips being able to move forward, if there's anything that I can contribute in a meaningful way and provide some information, and maybe it's not even the right information, but maybe it just gets you thinking about the way you look at things. And feel free to. I'm happy to try and help in any way I can.
No worries. Well, I'll link to your Instagram below. Thank you so much for coming on and sharing your story. I really appreciate your time.
Yeah, well, I really appreciate you taking the chance for me to come on here and, tell my story and hopefully add to the carnivore community and the benefits that this disease can, the benefits that, it can be provided from, a real therapeutic ketogenic diet that is, anti-inflammatory, I'm still here and thriving, and proof of that.